of the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I will start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of this committee. Screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted.
Today, of course, we are studying Bill S-227, and pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022, the committee is commencing the consideration of the bill, an act to establish Food Day in Canada. And I would now like to welcome our witnesses to our panel. So first of all, it's always a privilege, of course, to be able to be your chair in this committee, but it's always nice to be able to welcome my counterpart in the other place, as they say, Senator Black, who is the chair of the Agriculture Committee on the Senate side. Wonderful to have you here. Thank you for your work as a parliamentarian, and thank you for your work in this bill. And Mr. Nader, who is the sponsor of the bill here in the House of Commons, the Member of Parliament for Perth Wellington. Mr. Nader, thank you for your work, for helping sponsor this bill and your presence here before the committee. Now, colleagues, as your chair, I would hazard to guess that this is not a controversial bill. The clause by clause would be quite short because it's only one line. But I think it gives us an opportunity as a committee to, of course, ask our witnesses about the rationale for why this came forward, the ability to talk about the importance of agriculture and how we collectively share that vision. And I see John saying that there goes his question. The way in which I'm going to handle this, colleagues, is we will go back and forth in the traditional manner. Feel free to choose your time. We have up to 2 hours. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. It's really the discretion of this committee. So I'm in your hands as always. And I'm going to start with opening remarks, of course, for our witnesses, I believe. You have I've given you 7.5 minutes. You don't have to use all that time, but we're going to start with Senator Black. Over to you, my friend.
Good afternoon, and thanks very much for inviting me to appear before the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food today. It's my honor and pleasure. Bill S-227 seeks to designate the Saturday before the first Monday in August as Food Day in Canada. As we know, food is at the heart of our homes, our communities, and our economy. And I think one positive thing that has emerged from the pandemic is that many Canadians, especially those outside of rural and agriculture communities, have become more interested in learning about where and how their food is grown. It's important for our future generations to understand that our farmers, producers, processors, and agri-food retailers work hard to produce good food. Canadians, young and old, need to see for themselves that our agriculture communities care about the land, the commodities they grow, and the animals they raise. Having a nationally recognized Food Day in Canada can help them understand that there is so much to learn about agriculture and food production in our country, and will hopefully increase the public trust in our food supply systems. As rates of food insecurity rise not only in Canada but around the world, I believe it's paramount that we work to support our systems and trust that it can provide us with healthy, safe, and affordable food. When we talk about local food production, we're talking about the people in our everyday lives. We're talking about the farmers who grow the crops we drive by as we travel across Canada, about the agribusinesses who produce the food we see on the shelves, about the restaurateurs and chefs that feed us, and the vintners and brewers who produce the wine, beer, and spirits that we enjoy. Local food is about much more than just what we eat. It is about Canadians. We heard about these Canadians during the many speeches in your chamber from members from Perth, Wellington, Halton Hills, Guelph, Glengarry, Prescott, Russell, Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, and Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU. They all presented compelling accounts of how agriculture has impacted their communities and Canada at large. I am confident that most, if not all, parliamentarians could do so. Agriculture truly touches us all. As you know, Canada is one of the largest producers and exporters of agricultural products in the world. In 2021, the agriculture and agri-food system employed 2.1 million people, provided 1 in 9 jobs in Canada, and generated $139.4 billion, which is approximately 6.8% of Canada's gross domestic product. Passing the Food Day in Canada Act is another way we can acknowledge the important role that agriculture and local food plays in Canada. In fact, many provinces already celebrate local food with special days throughout the year. For example, here in Ontario, the province of Ontario passed legislation to proclaim Food Day Canada in Ontario in June of 2021. And while provincial celebrations are wonderful, I am a firm believer that there should be one day nationally when the entire country can come together in honor of this important sector. Bill S-227 would give Canadians a reason to celebrate agriculture and agri-food from coast to coast to coast together every summer. Some of you may recall that a previous bill, C-281, which originated in your chamber by a former member of Parliament, sought to designate the Friday before Thanksgiving each year as National Local Food Day. While the ideas may appear very similar, and I wholeheartedly support the call to celebrate agriculture at any time, Bill S-227 is based on an existing celebration that began as an industry-led initiative. I believe it's important that we involve industry as much as possible in the organization of this event. It is important, and the industry agrees, that the day falls in the summer, at the height of the growing season, as opposed to the fall when agriculture is slowing down before the start of winter. If established, this annual celebration would not only see Canadians join together in celebration of our food and the people who make it happen from our farms to our forks, but also encourage Canadians to continue learning about our agriculture and agri-food industries. It's a chance to highlight and appreciate the diverse and nutritious food products we have access to each and every day. Agriculture and agri-food are critical industries that contribute not only to the whole of our nation, but to countries around the world. I also want to, at this time, pay tribute to a great advocate, Anita Stewart, the founder of Food Day Canada. As many of you will know, the first Food Day in Canada was born from Anita's concern for beef farmers during the 2003 bovine spongiform encephalopathy crisis, BSE crisis. Anita was a trailblazer who made a tremendous impact on the health and well-being of the Canadian food system. Her spirit, her passion for Canadian cuisine from coast to coast to coast, and the people who grew, harvested, and cooked it was unrivaled. She is missed by all who knew her, and her memory lives on in the legacy of her recipes, her family, and of course, in Food Day Canada. Thanks very much again for inviting me to join you today. I'd also like to extend my thanks to many of you and many other members of Parliament who spoke in your chamber on Bill S-227. I look forward to answering your questions that you might have, and I look forward to hearing what our second witness has today say. Thanks in advance for your support of celebrating Canadian food, regardless of the outcome of this bill. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Black. Strong words, and we'll now go to Mr. Nader to follow up. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to be at the Agriculture Committee. Certainly a bit of a change of scenery sitting at this end of the table, but it's great to be here and great to be an associate member of this committee. I've subbed in a few times, but I've not yet had the honor and privilege of sitting on this committee as a permanent member, despite coming from what I argue is the greatest agriculture riding in the country, with the most dairy farmers in the country, the most chicken farmers in the country, the most pork producers in the province, and in the top 3 or 4 for beef producers, and some of the most fertile farmland anywhere literally in the world. So it is an honor to be here. First of all, I want to thank my dear colleague, Senator Black, for first introducing this bill in the other place, and for his initiative and his long-time advocacy for agriculture and the agri-food system. Of course, this bill didn't initiate really with either of us. We as the politicians who are pushing forward the legacy of someone else. And as the Senator mentioned in his statement, Food Day Canada is the legacy of the late Anita Stewart. So most of my words here today are not my words, but words from the Stewart family, from her 4 sons, Jeff, Brad, Mark, and Paul Stewart, who wrote to me and wanted me to express the words on their behalf about the importance of Food Day Canada. So these are their words. To us, Anita Stewart's 4 sons, growing up in a family surrounded by food and culture, we saw and learned many things about Canadian cuisine. We got to learn about how sharing food builds togetherness and connection. We got to see how food changes lives and creates community around a kitchen, around a table, or at a backyard barbecue. We met people who worked tirelessly to grow, harvest, and produce food, supporting their families and country. We got to see how food can brighten a day just by being delicious. Mom was a central figure of our family, but simultaneously also for our nation. It was Eve Johnson, a respected Canadian food journalist, who said, quote, If there was a patron saint of Canadian cuisine, it is Anita Stewart. According to the National Post, quote, Anita Stewart is the Wonder Woman of Canadian cuisine. It is our dream, Mum's dream, to have at least one day nationally when it is impossible to ignore the culinary, agriculture, and cultural food contributions that sustain and enrich our lives in our bountiful North. In Mum's own words, quote, by being attentive to our food sources, not only do we keep the cash flowing for our producers, but we also enable them to maintain and nurture diversity, creating a fabulous edible shopping list for us now and, even more important, for future generations. It is about pride and tenacity, and it is about the pure sensual pleasure of tasting the richness of Canada on every level. And that is an excerpt from Anita Stewart's Canada, HarperCollins Publishers. Food Day Canada was created as an incredible tribute to Canadian ingredients and celebration of the good people feeding our nation. In the ensuing years, Food Day Canada has evolved into a unique, award-winning, proactive, positive event in Canadian food and farming that provides an opportunity to engage Canadians in a celebration of who we are as a nation. Since its humble start, Food Day Canada has grown exponentially and become a respected force for good in the food lives of Canada. We are innovators, educators, and trendsetters. Hundreds of chefs from across the nation are our advocates. We are restaurateurs who are on the vanguard of Canadian culinary excellence and respected by a group of active volunteers. As chefs, restaurants, academics, producers, events, farmers, organizations, media, and enthusiastic foodies from across Canada, we care deeply about Canadian regional cuisine. Canadian cuisine is a food of possibilities. It is regional and seasonal, with a dash of our multicultural histories thrown in for good measure to create a nation of food stories. Coast to coast to coast, we have so many unique, authentic culinary possibilities. The food life of a nation expresses its collective culture as much as any newspaper or television program or splashy new building. The privilege of being a citizen in this nation, producing and harvesting some of the finest ingredients on earth, goes hand in hand with the challenge and responsibility to build a dynamic, real food culture, then celebrating it. We believe in using Canadian ingredients while we celebrate and recognize those who feed and nourish our nation, support the research and education of Canada's food, agriculture, and culture, and believe in our diversity, reflecting traditions, history, and our evolving nature. Canada is a diverse and geographically disparate nation from all coasts. Although we are bound by geography and community ties, we are separated by distance. Food Day Canada, through its presences, both virtually and in person, brings people together to celebrate. We share messages about the importance of supporting Canadians while creating multiple local and regional celebrations. Food Day Canada's call to action is a pledge to shop, cook, and dine Canadian. Participants shop locally at restaurants, businesses, and farms, or cook at home, or cottage, or campsite to build community by sharing their table while sharing positive messages of delicious celebrations and gratitude. Our hope is having the day nationally established may help create widespread opportunities for Canadians to learn about the agriculture and agri-food system while we deepen our conversations about food and celebrate our northern bounty while remembering what is most important to all of us: family, friends, community, and food. And Jeff, Brad, Mark, and Paul concluded with the words of their mother. So, join the party. Head to a market, buy local, go home and cook with the rhythms of the season. Be true to your own culinary story. It's really that simple. Anita Stewart. So I thank Jeff, Brad, Mark, and Paul Stewart for allowing me to share their words in the promotion of the legacy of their late mother and in the establishment of Food Day Canada. Colleagues, I thank you for your time this morning and hope we can find support to move Bill S-227 forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. I don't think you're going to have any issue in the support and strong words, and thank you to the Stewart family as well. Colleagues, we will move to questions, of course. Feel free to use as much time. I'll keep some eye on the clock, but I think we'll just allow individuals that want to engage, and we'll go from there. So, Mr. Barlow, you're first up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I think this would have been very easy to support and get through here until Mr. Nader made this a competition on whose riding was more agriculture than the rest. So we may have to hold him over the coals for just a little longer. Senator Black, you can go. We'll leave Mr. Nader. No, it is good to hear that everyone, certainly around this table, but within the House of Commons, is very proud of our our farmers and ranchers and producers and the critical role that they play. So I am glad that this came back, and certainly as Senator Black, you talked about the legacy of Anita Stewart and how important it was when BSC, and the fact that you can say bovine spongiform encephalopathy is fantastic, because it is important that we remember what brought this on initially, which was a catastrophic disease within the cattle industry, which, I maybe put on the record now is I'm hopeful that we do not go through that again, and how important it is that now the United States is no longer going to let us or share access to their vaccine bank, that it is imperative that Canada develop its own vaccine bank, especially with foot and mouth disease is a very real threat to Canadian agriculture. So I'm hopeful that that is something that the government is looking at very seriously to do. But to my question, I guess, is, I've got two questions for you. Looking at the previous PMB that Mr. Stetsky from BC had brought forward several years ago, he had the date as a set date in August, and this is kind of a floating date that will be between July and August, which I think the impetus of this bill is very important, when we share information and maybe educate Canadians about the importance of agriculture and modern Canadian agriculture and what we do. Why was that decision made to kind of have that floating day, I guess? And secondly, either one of you can ask, what do you envision Canada Food Day to be? And when I say that in that I think this is an opportunity for us, again, to educate Canadians about what farmers are actually doing, how they do it, why we do it, and the fact that we do it better than anyone else in the world. As producers, we are the biggest challenge we face is the misconception about what agriculture actually does. We are not Old MacDonald's farm any longer. We are modern, we are innovative, and we are environmentally, but we also must be economically sustainable. So I know that's two questions, but the date and what do you envision the education portion of Food Day to be?
Thanks very much, Mr. Barlow, for your question. With respect to the date, Food Day in Canada that Anita Stewart started was in Ontario, the August long weekend. And that has, to this date, 19 years later, always been the August long weekend in Ontario. But we know that the August long weekend isn't always, or isn't a long weekend in across Canada in some other provinces. And so when we went to the legal team and the clerks on our end, we had to make it so that it's the last Saturday before the first Monday in August, so that it is always that weekend of the long weekend. That is the one and only reason. The previous bill, as you referred to, was the Friday before the Thanksgiving weekend. And when it came to the Senate chamber, we did make an amendment that would bring it to, we said, the August long weekend date. That was actually an error on our drafting team's part at that time, but it died in the Senate chamber anyways. So it is that reason it is in fact the August long weekend where Anita has always had it going in the past. And I might point out that 2023 is the 20th anniversary of that very first world's largest barbecue, which she started, that was a precursor to the, in Elora, I might add, that was a precursor to the Food Day Canada.
And if I could maybe address the second part of the question, what do we want to see from it? I think there's a lot of things that we can see from it, and I think that one of the biggest things is food literacy, is that the Canadians know where Canadian food comes from. It doesn't come from a grocery store shelf. It comes from hardworking farmers and farm families and processors, frankly, across the country who do this work. And some of the things we've seen with Food Day Canada in the last few years are a lot of visual representations. The CN Tower was lit in red and white. Niagara Falls was lit in red and white. The Calgary Tower was lit in red and white to promote Canadian food on Food Day Canada. So there's a visual representation to force Canadians to see it and then to ask the questions about where things go with it. And I want to highlight as well, the BSE crisis, because that is something exceptionally negative, something challenging, something that frankly is still being felt nearly 20 years later by beef farmers across Canada. They're still feeling the effects of that all these years later. Something positive came, and that's the promotion of Canadian food. So if we can build on that legacy that came out of the dark days of 2003 and now nearly...
Et maintenant, près de 20 ans plus tard, faire la promotion de la nourriture qui nous alimente ainsi que le monde, ce sera un héritage issu de cette crise pénible. Et si je peux ajouter quelque chose, le groupe qui supervise la journée canadienne de l'alimentation, un petit groupe d'amis d'Anita.
Mr. Black, we might have an
Nous
issue
n'avons
with-
plus de traduction.
Okay.
Chair, we lost interpretation there for a sec.
Until you're able to hear me in French, Mr. Parole. Okay, we're good. I had stopped the clock. Mr. Black, you want to finish that, and we'll go from there.
We'll just say that the small group of Anita's friends that are involved in Food Day Canada are seized with this education piece going forward. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Black, Mr. Nader, and Mr. Barlow. Now we have Mr. Drouin for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank Senator Black for introducing the bill in the Senate, and obviously Mr. Nader for sponsoring that bill. And I do have to congratulate both of you. You are probably the only senator and MPs that will reunite Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Barlow at the same table and agreeing on one bill. So congratulations. I think you've, and I'm going to ask the question and ask for both witnesses to answer, but if there's one thing where you'd like to leave behind and for Food Day Canada, and you've talked about the legacy of Anita Stewart, what would you like to see across Canada happening every Saturday of the long weekend when we do celebrate that?
From my perspective, I'd like to see us acknowledge and recognize the continuum from farmer to plate, whether it's your plate, that you've cooked on the barbecue, or whether it's us enjoying something at a restaurant. The legacy of food and cuisine in Canada would be my desire. I remember having a discussion with Anita on her back deck not long before she passed, and her desire was to see Food Day in Canada nationally, and those were almost her words, and so I would just echo that.
And to build on what Senator Black just said, I think the sheer ability to share a meal, to break bread with those around you, whether it's with a family member, whether it's with a neighbor, whether it's with a community gathering, or whether it's with a complete stranger. I think that ability to share a meal together, to bond over that shared experience, I think is so important. One of the events that I like to attend every year in my riding is a meal called To Stratford with Love, and it happens before Christmas every year. 1,800 people come together and share a meal, and it's like a large family dinner where you come together, share a meal together, and get to know people that you frankly have never met before. But to everyone in that room, you're all neighbors, you're all family, you're all coming together. And I think the ability to share that bond over a meal is so important. I think frankly, sometimes we've lost that in recent times, especially with the challenges of the pandemic for the last 2 years. That ability to come together and share a meal together, I think, is so important. So thank you for that question, Mr. Duran.
Great, thank you. And again, Mr. Barlow and I may want to put a friendly amendment in that bill just to ensure that Foothills and Glengarry, Prescott, Russell are the best ridings for agriculture. But just kidding, we know the process would have to go back in the Senate, and we definitely do not want to do this. So just hearing you out, it doesn't matter how we would celebrate Food Day. It's just a matter of if people can tell the story of food across Canada, whether it's a farmer demonstrating what they're doing on their farm, or it's a chef demonstrating how they're cooking food, or whatnot. And I think that's, I just want to salute your efforts. And I think the chair has already acknowledged that it's a one-liner bill. It's simple. And I'm not going to ask any questions anymore. I think both of you have done an amazing job at telling the story and the legacy of Anita Stewart, and I want to thank you. And I know I will definitely, as I've announced before, be supporting this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to you.
There's still a little bit of time. I know, Ms. Taylor-Roy, you wanted to have an intervention, so perhaps I would invite you to make a few comments now.
Yes, I was going to ask a question very much along the lines of my colleagues. So, sharing a meal with people is something we do often, and maybe not so much since the pandemic, you're right. But I'm wondering, like, when I read about Anita Stewart, what her mission was, and just listening to you read the letter from her sons, it seems like a lot of the emphasis was on local food, Canadian food, and she was also focused on healthy food, environmental sustainability, diversity, labor conditions as well. So I'm just wondering, is there any angle that focuses more on the local or the environmental part? Because that seems to be her legacy. And you mentioned the small group of friends. So I'm just wondering, is there anything on that side as well that we'll be celebrating? Thank you.
Senator Black would like to chime in as well. And we just 2 seconds ago talked about, she was University of Guelph's first food laureate. And the food lab at the University of Guelph is now named in her honor, which is I think is just simply exceptional. The focus on Canadian food and local food is absolutely essential and a core of what Food Day Canada would be, and building on the legacy of Anita Stewart. If you read some of the stories about Anita, she took great joy in traveling the country and experiencing firsthand, unique and culturally appropriate, different regional food sources. And I think that's kind of one of the exciting celebrations of this. Local food is different to people in different regions and to different cultures. So experiencing that angle is just so important. And the second, on the local, the environmental side of things, especially coming from rural ridings and rural communities like us, it's just so important that we see that in our own backyard. I look at organizations like Food Centres Canada, local community food centre in Stratford, which provides that local dynamic, that ability to learn how to use local ingredients, to go beyond simply providing a meal, but actually knowing what goes into that meal, how it's prepared, and where that food comes from. So I'll turn it over to the Senator.
Sure, she was a food laureate at the University of Guelph, and they have not filled that position yet because it takes a special person to do that. But she put her heart and soul into that role as a food laureate, and her cookbooks are all Canadian, and each of them tells a story. And I remember reading and hearing her talk about traveling the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and catching fish and then cooking it locally. So she always ate local, and her idea was the Canadian cuisine has a story to tell, and that's what she wanted to see done.
So we are at time, Ms. Taylor-Roy. We'll move to Mr. Parent if you have any questions or comments, and of course if other members on either side want to continue. But Monsieur Parent, allez-y.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins d'être.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. So I wouldn't want my writing to be one of the only ones not named, so I don't want my colleagues to underestimate the agricultural potential of Berthier-Masquinongé, the most beautiful writing in the world. Thank you, Senator Black, for this initiative. I think local food is never celebrated enough. If I understood what my colleagues have said, I understand why the date has been changed, but do we know why C-281 was not adopted? Do you have an answer to that question?
C-281 did come to the Senate, was referred to the Ag Committee. There was an amendment that changed the date to August, and it did not pass. It did not pass. It came back to the Senate. Did not pass there before Parliament was prorogued. So that's the only reason.
OK, encore une fois, donc on.
Okay, so we will redo what was well done once already. So we will do it again. I have a few questions. I understood the intention behind this day, that is to highlight farmers, producers, and to make people aware of how food is produced, where it's produced, what the chain is from the farm to the fork. This is all excellent. Here's my first question. Why do we change local food to Food Day in Canada. Local food was good as well, no? Thank you for your question, Mr. Perron. For us, the name of the day is the name that Ms. Stewart created in 2003. So it was called Food Day Canada in English, and in French, Journée Canadienne de l'Alimentation. So it's the name that Ms. Stewart used in 2003. That's the reason. But the intention is local food. It really is food that we find in our communities. So the object hasn't changed, all right. And it's already the day of local food producing areas in Canada. So do you think that this will mean competition between the two days, or will it be complementary?
There are a number of provincial days, a number of special days. We have Local Food Day in Ontario, or Local Food Week is in just ahead of Thanksgiving. Other provinces have other days. I think it's complementary, and I think any day that we can celebrate food, Canadian cuisine, local food, is an important one. This day just puts one day across Canada that we can stop and call it a national day.
Je comprends bien l'intention.
I understand the intention, and I think it's clear that I am in favor of this bill. But if we were trying to make things better, what do you think we will have to do that day that is special? Because you said in your answer that there are already different days with different names, and as a politician, I don't know if you've had the same experience, but we try to follow this in the social media, but there are so many different days that they lose some of their meaning. So if we want this day to be really positive, to have a really positive effect for the agricultural world, we'll have to organize really special events. Have you discussed this? Have you thought about including something in the bill, or you're satisfied with the general idea and you think that things will happen automatically?
Small group of friends of Anita Stewart that have carried this day on and that are driving this thing, and I participate in some of their meetings, and I can share with you that that group has many things that they have planned for the future. But as Mr. Nader noted, a number of sites across Canada were lit up in red and white. And that list is growing and has grown over the last 5 or 6 years. So they're working on that. And social media is significant on the days leading up to and the day of Food Day Canada. And so I just anticipate greater things moving forward. I'm excited to share with you that I think we've just begun. We, the committee, the small group, has just begun to make this a bigger thing across Canada on that Saturday in August.
Et aussi, je dirais aussi, des partenariats sont importants.
And also there are partnerships. Thank you. This is all for my questions. Thank you, Mr. Perron, Mr. Nader, and Mr. Black. Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes now.
Black, Mr. Nader, thanks for being here. I can actually remember being at this committee 4 years ago on June of 2018 when Mr. Stetsky was before our committee. He was an NDP colleague of mine, and it's nice to see, Senator Black, that you're carrying forward, and I think we've got a real shot of getting this into law. So congratulations to you both. It's not like we have to take a really deep dive into this bill. It's pretty straightforward. But I think one thing I wanted to ask, everyone who's spoken so far has talked about the agricultural bounty of their ridings. And, Couch and Malahat Langford in the Hulkaminam tongue means the warm land. And I believe we are Canada's only Mediterranean-style climate in all of Canada. So we are definitely right up there. But I'm on the coast, and we associate a lot of our food bounty with the ocean. And I know I've got everyone beat around this table with the best salmon fishing. You cannot beat the West Coast salmon fishing off of Port Renfrew in my riding. And it's incredibly important to local First Nations. Cowichan Tribes is the largest First Nation in all of British Columbia. And I have a very high Indigenous population in my riding, and a lot of their culturally important historical food sources are all associated with the bounty that the ocean provides. So, Mr. Nader, you were talking about, you referenced culturally important food. Just if both of you had some comments to talk about, because I know we tend to focus a lot on agriculture, but we also have to realize that this country's natural bounty is also there for enjoyment by all.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. McGregor, and thank you again for your speech in favor of this bill at second reading. I think it's well appreciated. Certainly, you're absolutely right. And if you look at the unique and richness of Indigenous culture, a lot of that does relate to some of the unique foods and the culturally appropriate food that does come from different parts of the country, but most notably, in your case, the ocean. And Perth Wellington has very poor salmon fishing. I'll make note of that. But that's part of the joy of this bill, is that we can celebrate all aspects of where food comes from, whether it's land, whether it's sea, whether it's any part between the country. And I think, frankly, the legacy of Anita Stewart and some of the works that she has done has touched on some of the Indigenous culture, some of the Indigenous food preparation and sources of food that have we've seen throughout the country. So I think this is a special opportunity that we can really look at that unique richness of culture. And I'm sure some of us around the table may be somewhat jealous sometimes of your Mediterranean climate, and I think that gives an opportunity to celebrate that as well. Thank you.
Anita Stewart's stories, and I have heard many of them, all talk about the localness of the food. And so I have seen pictures of her out on boats, salmon fishing, or in the north on a dog sled, going somewhere. So, and I will point out that her celebration of life, which was held on the 24th of September of this year, the dinner afterwards was a bounty of cross-Canada food, served family style to 150 people, and there was a bounty from the Pacific Ocean. And I will share that. 2 of her sons live in the West Coast. And so that was close for her. I also want to point out that there is a website that we should have mentioned earlier, but it's a place where all chefs from across Canada can participate. And so when they're doing that, they're also talking about local, whether it's the bounty from the ocean or from the north or from central Canada. So they share recipes of local food. They highlight local food from their area and their region. So we can't forget about that.
Thank you to both.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Now I understand Ms. Rood and Mr. Liu are going to split just a short period of time for some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Black, for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Nader, for being here today. I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Nader as well. I'm sorry, Lambton Kent Middlesex has some amazing farmers. I don't quite get you with dairy and chicken, but we're close with the amount of farms that we have. But I just want to say thank you for bringing this forward. I know Ms. Stewart's family is very supportive of this, and they've been champions of this day as well, and look forward to seeing this bill pass and having a national day to celebrate Canadian food and the people who produce it as well. So thank you.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur Nader, Sénateur Black, d'être présent avec nous.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. Thank you, Senator Black, for being here. As a farmer in the past, food day in Canada seems to me an excellent project, and I'm sure it will be adopted quickly, and hopefully it can be in place for the summer of 23. Mr. Nader, you talked about different partnerships. You were going to elaborate more on this, and I think it will be important to underline the importance of this day. It will be important to identify potential partnerships. I'm thinking in Quebec, there are things that are done already, but can we work in partnership with different actors in order to increase the impact that this day can have in Canada? And I find it important to mention how important it is at a time when we are thinking a lot and studying food insecurity. So I think that it's very important. Mr. Nader, could you please talk about partnerships a little more?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lew.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Liu. In my opinion, that is a very important aspect. Partnerships with industry, with restaurants, with people who produce the food for us every day is very, very important, having these partnerships in place. Partnering up with the industry, with agriculture, with producers. So these partnerships would also teach us a lot about the different aspects of food production from different parts of our country. You also mentioned food insecurity. And we are a country that is so rich in food.
Canadians, with such a rich country, still see food insecurity in our country. So building these partnerships, building the ability to promote, to focus on local food, building the skill set in different avenues, in different ways to ensure that we have that ability to feed the country and to feed the country with healthy, nutritious, local food. I think that's something that we as a country, using this day, will be able to promote.
So the ultimate objective of this day would then be to raise awareness among the entire Canadian population about the importance of food that is being produced here in the country, regardless of where in the country. I will not go into the competition between different ridings, but Beauce is also a good production basin. So the entire Canadian population should learn more about food, because in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, there's been a bit more of a distance, if you will, between Canadians and their understanding of where the food they eat comes from. So I think this is an aspect of this day that should be highlighted. I don't know if Senator Black has a comment to add.
Very much. I will, again, as I share with you that I sit with the small group that are involved in this. Partnerships is a big piece of what they do, and they bring their various networks together. They are partnered with provincial ag organizations across Canada. They have that already in place. It's the and industry, but it's the smaller, the local food that. So I'm happy to share with any suggestions you might have. Feel free to contact me. Food security is an issue that the Stewart brothers are keen on, and they felt that last year they would keep it moving forward, keep Food Day Canada last year moving forward. I can share with you, without going into any detail, that food security and food insecurity issues will be high on their list in the years to come.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, nous avons.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to Ms. Valdez and then Mr. Turnbull.
Here and for sharing the story of the root of this bill. I don't think anyone's brought it up yet, but we recently reviewed the Canada's Food Price Report, and it confirmed that food safety is at the top of Canadians' minds right now. So I was just wondering how you were planning to use this bill to advocate for food safety.
I think it's important. All aspects of preparations of food is part of this bill, as whether I prepare it in my home or in a restaurant and chefs prepare it. So food safety, food security is a big piece of the work that this group of friends are thinking about as they move forward. Food safety has to be at the top of our list. And so as we come to know food and know where and how our food is prepared, I think it's important that be top of mind as well.
Thank you. And as a food entrepreneur myself and a restaurateur, I was just curious as to how you're planning to engage the local restaurateurs as you're, say, rolling this out.
So the committee, the small group that's involved in this, works through the Restaurant Association, which filters out information. But I am well aware that many restaurants in many of our cities across this country get involved through on the day preparing Food Day in Canada type meals. And I can tell you that I was here in Ottawa 2 years ago, and there were 4 restaurants that I made it to 2, but there were 4 restaurants that prepared specific Food Day in Canada meals.
Thank you. And the last question is, Mississauga Streetsville doesn't quite have as many farms as my colleagues around this table, but we certainly have a hub of local businesses, restaurateurs, and I love how diverse our community is. So I'm just encouraging you both in whatever way you roll out this bill to really advocate for having people try new foods, try new from different cultures and cuisines. So I was just wondering if you had considered that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a wonderful point to make, because not everyone is going to live in an agricultural riding. Not a lot of large agriculture-based farms in your riding, or in Whitby, or in Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. But certainly we all eat, and where that food comes from, and the different knowledge that comes with that food. So the ability to work with restaurants, to work with community groups, work with organizations to promote unique food options that come from Canada, that come from the bounty that is our country. We are the one of the greatest agriculture producing nations in the world, and so any way we can celebrate that, whether it's rural, urban, suburban, you name it, all of our country is able to come together and focus on this day. So a wonderful point.
Thank you.
Ms. Feldes, don't sell yourself short. Agri-Food. It's agriculture and agri-food. So on that side, Mr. Turnbull, now over to you.
Thanks. Well, I couldn't pass up this rare opportunity to speak in support of a bill before this committee, which is great. I couldn't be in more support. I couldn't really, I can barely find the words for how supportive I am for this. It's really a great bill. Thank you both for putting it forward. I do have a few things that I wanted to say. I really think it's great that you're paying tribute to Anita Stewart and her legacy. For me, all my work in food systems development over quite a number of years, about 15 years, I had a really good friend named Wayne Roberts. I don't know if you've ever heard that name, but Wayne Roberts was a doctor, a PhD, that started the first Food Policy Council in Canada in Toronto. He also was on the board of Food Share Toronto, Sustain Ontario. He was a founding member of Food Secure Canada. He won the Canadian Environmental Award. He chaired the Toronto-based Coalition for the Green Economy. He won the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award, and he passed away January 20th, 2021 at 76 years old, same age as my father, of cancer. And it broke my heart to lose that friend. He was one of my best friends and taught me so much about food and food systems. And, I think if he were here today, he would support this bill. And I often think about him when I'm on this committee and thinking about the interventions I make. But he would definitely support this. I know because he loved the food system. He saw the diversity in our food system as an incredible opportunity for us to celebrate our culture as Canadians. Also, to really, he saw it as a gateway. He saw food as a gateway to solve many of our issues. And he wrote the book called Food for City Building, which is a really great book if anyone has the time to read it. Contrary to popular opinion, sometimes we hear about food in rural communities, many of which I've worked with. Mr. Nader, I worked in your community, and Mr. Rood, I worked in Middlesex, London, to form the Food Policy Council there over 3 years. And Perth County is, so I hope you guys don't debate that too fiercely, because you both come from really great agricultural regions of Ontario. But I think the point I want to make is that Wayne Roberts, talked about food as medicine. He talked about it as one of our last connections with nature. Our daily imbibing and enjoyment of food really connects us to the natural world, which many of us have lost. He talked about how through the food system we can build healthier communities, we can build a more prosperous economy, we can protect the environment, we can promote biodiversity, we can employ people, offer skill building opportunities, have a better sense of mental health and wellness, and on and on and on. I mean, literally there's almost no end to it when you think about it. So, it's really great, and I hope that a National Food Day like this, we'll get to celebrate food system champions from across Canada. That's something I'm hoping for. I hope you guys would support that. I think you probably will. Anita Stewart is definitely a food champion to celebrate, but there's many others. I can think of Debbie Field, who was one of the founders of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, who has worked with for her whole lifetime to get children food, healthy, nutritious food. Kathleen Neen, who passed away years ago. Nick Saul, who started Community Food Centres of Canada. And there's many, many others across Canada. Obviously, we can't name them all. I just wanted to say that I hope we can honor those food system champions. That's something I'd really look forward to. The only other point, maybe two really quick points I think are important. Food literacy in my work previously came up over and over and over again when we talk about food security. And many of the organizations that work on building a more food secure Canada are really talking about, income security, but they're also talking about food literacy. And food literacy, we know, is a general term that includes all the skills, whether it be shopping, harvesting, growing food, understanding where it comes from, but all the skills all along, right to maybe the compost pile. How do you compost? And I think a Canada Food Day like this could really support us raising awareness and building a lot more food literacy in Canada, and that's certainly something I would support. And lastly, for me, a sustainable food system is one that's a citizen-engaged food system. It's democratic. It promotes a sense of active involvement and participation in the food system. And I think, in some ways, and Wayne Roberts really taught me this, that through the food system we can also build a healthy democracy. And so I'll leave that with you just as considerations, but I'm really thankful of your work on this, and it's rare that we find things that we can all support, and there's not much debate on. So kudos to both of you for your work on this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I'll just have some final concluding remarks. It won't be long. First of all, just the ability as food as an ability to bring urban and rural communities together. Senator Black, you and I were at the Canadian Association of Fairs and Exhibitions. That was part of my remarks on how fairs are a way to bring people together in that domain. Mr. Perron, I see your hand. Do we have a translation issue? You want another round of questions?
No, c'est juste pour...
It's just to ask a final question, but I'll go after you, Mr. Chair.
Perron.
OK, d'accord. Le président veut se garder le...
Okay, the chair keeps the privilege of bringing the meeting to a close. I have a question to you, Mr. Black. So we were talking about the name of the day. The objective is clear. We're unanimous on that. Local consumption, we want to encourage that. And everyone agrees on that. But why do we not mention that on the title? It's a big question, but nonetheless, as an example, what would you think about an amendment that says add local after food in the title? or that would go before in the English version, but in the French after. So in the French, it would be Journée canadienne de l'alimentation locale, but in English, it is Food Day in Canada. But it doesn't specifically mention the local aspect of the food. So would you be open to a proposal? Or do you think that do you think it's clear as is?
From my perspective, I believe it's clear as it is. I think when individuals, communities, people in Canada delve into Food Day Canada, the day, they'll quickly realize in all respects it's local, it's food cuisine, it's food culture, it's how you prepare your food. I think it's fine as it is, my personal opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Thank you, Senator Black. Colleagues, I don't see any other hands. I appreciate the conversation that we've had thus far today on the legislation. As I was saying to you, Senator Black, I see food and the conversation around celebrating food in Canada as an opportunity to bring urban and rural communities together. So I applaud you and Mr. Nader on your work. I also know that any good parliamentarian has good staff around them, and I see Kimberly and Olivia at the back, who I've had the chance to be able to work with. So I know that they are integral to your team. So thank you to your staff. And the final thing I just want to say, of course, I would be remiss without mentioning my agriculture community in Kings Hants on the love in here. Now, as your independent, impartial chair, I will not say that Kings Hants is the best riding in the country vis-a-vis agriculture, but it is one of the best. And we all have that privilege of representing agriculture stakeholders. And my tip of the cap to them today, if they're listening and watching into this committee. So, colleagues, I think we can end there. A couple things that I need to say is if there are amendments, which it's not my job to dissuade you from doing so, but I will dissuade you from doing so because it would make this bill, which I think is not controversial, be forced to go back to the Senate, as Mr. Nader has highlighted. But if you do feel the need, or any parliamentarian, it is November 30th is the deadline to get that to the legislative clerk. And for the benefit of Mr. Nader and Mr. Black, we are intending to do clause by clause, which will not take long, on December 14th. So we hope to have this reported back before Christmas as a nice Christmas gift to you and to all the folks that were involved. Colleagues, we will be meeting on Monday to take on the study that we had talked about, which is in relation to supply management and Ukraine. We are working on witnesses, and we hope to have a confirmation of panels in due course as the clerk is working on getting that lined up. Any other questions or concerns, colleagues? Last thing I want to say, tonight is Irish Heritage Night, and our good friend Jamie Maloney, who is the member from Etobicoke Lakeshore, is hosting. I think, Senator Black, you might even be giving remarks there, so I would encourage you to go have a pint and celebrate all things Irish. Okay, take care. And Canadian, Irish Canadian, there we go.
you.